Clive is an employee at my company. He's hardworking and has this incredible knack to come up with cheap and creative solutions to some of our biggest problems. But he can be quite critical of others and can be really difficult to deal with in meetings. Should I fire him or should I keep him? What do you think? Did you come to a conclusion? Did you form an opinion? Did you make a decision to give me some advice? I think if we think about the last few seconds and just reflect on it for a bit, it's pretty incredible that we were able to form a definitive opinion about Clive with very little information. I mean, I didn't say anything about what my company is. I didn't say anything about how many employees we have. I didn't say anything about Clive's role or how long he's been at the company. And you were probably able to give me some advice or to form an opinion as to what I should do. And I think this highlights how quick we are just as human beings navigating in a complex world to come to conclusions and to jump to forming opinions very, very quickly when oftentimes we have limited information. And the real kicker is that we don't even think about trying to gather more information about the situation. We're really just quick to form these opinions. So today what I want to talk about is how we can think about making better decisions, acknowledging the fact that we are quick to jump to conclusions and that we are quick to form opinions. And so today I'll be using this book, Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath, to talk a little bit about some ideas and some frameworks for better decision making. And so I picked this book up around this time last year, and it was a point where I was trying to be a little bit more honest about flaws in my thinking, a little bit more honest about some of the psychological biases that I think we all suffer from, and just wanted to get a jump start for how to think a little bit more clearly about making better decisions and about problem solving, and to just generally get a better framework for how to go about better decision making. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's get into their 4-step framework. So the first thing that the book recommends is this idea of widening our horizons. So the idea here is to consider options that we wouldn't necessarily immediately consider when we're presented with information. So if we think back to Clive and the initial situation that I proposed in the beginning, well, maybe we don't just have to fire him, and maybe we don't have to decide whether or not to fire him today. Maybe we can decide that in a month, or maybe we can decide that like 3 or 4 weeks down the line. Or maybe we don't even have to think about firing him. Maybe we can give him some training options. Maybe we can give him like counseling or professional support. Maybe there are ways in which to improve Clive's ability as an employee, rather than just trying to think about whether or not we should keep him or fire him. So the idea here is, what are the alternatives that we haven't really considered? I think one thing to consider here is that when we're presented with a decision or when we're presented with an option, it's often we often look at it from this like very binary point of view. So if I'm trying to decide, should I go to the gym or should I go to this party? It's oftentimes one or the other. Like, should I go to the gym? Should I go to the party? But maybe there's this spectrum of decisions in between that I might be able to also take advantage of. So that's something like, maybe I go to the gym for 10 minutes and then go to the party for 45 minutes. Or maybe I go to the gym for 30 minutes and go to the party for 30 minutes. Or maybe I go to neither of them. Or maybe I stop by the gym, do my exercises at home, and then go to the party. Or maybe I go to the party and do some exercises there. So the idea here is more so that just trying to get ourselves out of the framework of thinking about the decisions in this binary way where it's either this or that, and maybe we can think about it, maybe I can do this and that, or maybe I can do this with a little bit of that, and trying to generally just broaden the set of options that we consider before we make a decision. So that's step 1, is widening our perspectives and widening our horizons. The next thing the book talks about is reality testing our assumptions. And so the idea here is, how can we collect more trustworthy and informative information about the situation that we're dealing with? And I think this one is particularly relevant to me as a product manager and as someone who's working in like a corporate environment and in tech, because you see it all the time. I think the first place where you see it is generally with like mentorship and with trying to get professional and career advice, right? The whole idea of trying to find a mentor, or trying to find someone to give you advice in your career, is that this is someone who has lived that experience. This is someone who has been in your shoes, who has walked that same path, and who can give you recommendations based off of their lived experience because they've done the same thing. That'd be the idea of like me going to try and find a seasoned product manager who's maybe 10 or 20 years in the industry and asking them for advice because they've lived that experience. They're much closer to the truth than, just like your average Joe on the street would be. And they're much closer to the truth than I would be with my limited information of what that industry is. So that's one way to look at it. Maybe another way to think about it is rather than trying to find someone who is an expert in this field or who has 10 to 20 years of experience, someone who's a little bit closer to me, who's maybe just 1 or 2 steps ahead of me, because they're going to have the most recent overview and perspective of the current landscape. So with my product management example, this might be someone who's only been a product manager for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, or maybe who's only a year or 2 ahead of me, but knows the more recent landscape and knows about the things that I might have to do right now to get myself to the next level. The kind of information that someone who's 10 or 20 years down the line might not have, because even though they're an expert in the field, the landscape might have changed when they were in my shoes, or the landscape might have changed when they were first, from when they were first starting out. So just generally, the goal is to try and find perspectives that are trustworthy and that are more likely to be closer to the truth and more perfect information before we make this decision. The second way that you sort of see this often in business context is with the idea of launching a product and developing the MVP, or the minimum viable product. And so the whole idea here is how can I, if I want to build out some sort of functionality or some sort of application, let's say I want to build an app that helps people summarize books and presents them with a summary every morning, right? Before I take on the work of building out this entire solution, what I can do is I can present this to, I can build out a very simple version and test it out with users, test it out with customers, and try and see, hey, is this useful? Is it accessible? Is it easy to use? Does it actually help you achieve your goal? So the idea here is how can I get feedback as early as possible to test my assumptions when I was developing the product. And so it's a similar idea, but instead of talking to an expert or someone who has recently lived the experience, instead it's how can I get as quickly as possible feedback on how I'm performing, or how can I get feedback as quick as possible on this on the decision that I've made. The next thing that the book talks about is this idea of attaining distance, and the general idea here is how can we step away and try and get away from our immediate hot cognition, our immediate emotions that might arise for any decision that we're going to make. So I think a really good example here is I'm walking through the store, I see this beautiful puffer jacket, and I'm like, I need it. The winter's coming up. I need a jacket. And, maybe when I'm in the moment, I really, really, really have this strong desire and this strong pull towards buying that jacket. But maybe a few hours later, when I come back home, I realize, hey, actually, I have pretty decent jackets. I have a bunch of layers, and I'm actually fine without that jacket. The basic idea is that our emotions, which often dictate our decisions, shift and fluctuate. And if we try and make decisions when we have these really hot and quick and fast-moving emotions, even though those are important to consider, it's not going to give the full picture of whether or not this is a good decision. Maybe sometimes we need to step away, get a little bit of distance, and see how this purchase or this decision or how our emotions are going to factor into this decision in the long run. And so the book suggests 2 frameworks that I think are really helpful for trying to get this emotional distance. The first is to think of the 10-10-10 rule, which is how is this decision going to make me feel in 10 minutes? How is this decision going to make me feel in 10 months? And how is this decision going to make me feel in 10 years? So in the case of buying this fancy jacket, well, in 10 minutes, maybe I'll feel good about it. Maybe I won't. In 10 months, well, maybe it won't be the best decision because it'll no longer be winter, and I'll realize that, I actually have other clothes at home that I could have made use of. And in 10 years, well, it probably won't matter because I won't have the jacket at all. So what that helps us think about is, okay, well, in the long run, this decision probably doesn't matter too much, but also in I guess the more middle, in the 10 months period, well, maybe this isn't the best decision because it sounds really good in the next 10 minutes, but maybe in taking a longer perspective reveals that, maybe it's not the best decision for me right now. The second thing that's really helpful is to think about what advice would I give to my best friend in this situation. I think why this is helpful is because it's much easier to have an unbiased perspective when we're trying to give advice and give a recommendation to other people than it is for ourselves, because we get so trapped in our own emotions and in our own feelings that sometimes it can be hard to look outside of those. So the last thing that Chip and Dan Heath recommend is just generally to prepare to be wrong. And it's the last part of their framework. And the idea here is just that, we're not always going to have perfect decisions or perfect information to make these decisions, and that generally, we're trying to make an educated guess based off of the information that we have. And at the end of the day, that no information that we have is perfect, that the world is a complex place with tons of interacting parts, and very few of those parts are actually within our control. And as a result, because we can't control every single moving part, we can't control or determine the final outcome of a decision, because there might just be things that we never considered. There might just be things that don't rely on us, that don't depend on us, and that might have their outcomes driven by other people. And so just generally to be okay with, if we're wrong, if the decision doesn't end up being the best one, or if it doesn't end up being good in hindsight, because we haven't made this decision with perfect information. I think this is an idea that was talked about in a book that I read a few years ago called Thinking in Bets. And the general idea is to think that it's much easier to catch our faults and flaws in our decision making after the fact, because we know the outcome and we know what actually happened. But at the time when we were making the decision, we made the best choice. We made the best decision given the information, given the limited information that we had at the time. And we can trust the process and trust that in the future that we'll continue to get better at this if we continue to gain emotional distance, to widen our perspectives, and to reality check our assumptions. So generally, those were the key takeaways from this book, Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. Overall, it's been a super helpful book and has definitely helped me make better decisions and think about how I can go about having better decision making on my day-to-day life. I hope that this video was helpful, and if you liked it, feel free to check out another video here. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.